Okay, hello everyone, this is Gray from Wakazashi's Tea House over in Japan. I hope you're good, I hope you're Genki. I've got somebody with me today, a very special guest, all the way from the United States, but he's not sounding very Genki this morning. And by the way, Jim, Genki means fine. So how are you? How are you today?
I am fine. I'm Genki. I actually thought, I was thinking, what does he mean by Genki? Because you said that before we started, and I'm like, does he mean like I'm not like really off the wall, like yelling and screaming? Because we'll probably get there. I'm still waking up. It's still early. It's not early for me, but it's early for me. So.
Well, I appreciate you joining. I know you're very busy because you're dropping like, how many is it? Is it 33 videos a day and podcasts at the moment?
There's a lot of stuff. It gets tiring. The thing is, when you do all these podcasts, you forget you have to edit them. And then that's what takes the longest. So I was up late last night editing stuff, and that's not that much fun.
It's not, is it? I think that's the part most people don't see, and especially with videos. Man, the editing, that takes me a long time.
Yeah,
how do you find that with podcasts, with audio? Do you find that videos take longer to edit or the podcast?
It depends. At one point, our DC Comics podcast was 13 hours long. So that took a while to edit. We had for about a year, every week we had at least a 10-hour plus podcast. It was insane, but I don't know. I was younger then. That was a couple of years ago. So for some reason, it didn't affect me as much. But now we end up where people say, "Man, your podcast is so long," and I'm like, it's only 4 hours long. And then people go nuts. I'm like, no, it was 12, 13 hours at one point every week. Yeah, that took a while, but now it's just, instead of a 13-hour podcast, it's 15 half-hour podcasts, which is better, but it still takes a lot.
It does take a lot. Okay, let's have a quick introduction, if that's all right. Could you let people know who may not have found your channel or your podcast, where can they find you, and who are you?
I'm Jim, and I have a bunch of podcasts. You can go to YouTube first at Weird Science Comics and find our YouTube channel where I do DC, Marvel, and manga reviews and some commentary, a lot of reviews, though. Then you can go to our podcast. It's the Weird Science DC Comics podcast, the Weird Science Marvel Comics podcast, the Weird Science Manga podcast, and just the deal, the manga podcast, we have 8 podcasts. One podcast for each day, and then an extra one. Then on the DC podcast, we have one on Sunday. The Marvel, we have 3. We have a bunch of nonsense, and then we have websites for the DC and the Marvel. It's all kind of combined. Once you find one, it kind of pushes you to the other things. But yeah, we have a ton of crazy things going on.
I don't know how you do it. It's amazing. I became a Patreon recently because I just wanted to show a little bit of support because you don't have channel memberships yet on YouTube. But I'm sure you're going to get there not too long from now. But yeah, I don't know how you do it, Jim. Seriously, you've got so many different podcasts. Now, I know they're not all done by you. Do you have help with different people with those podcasts?
Yeah, well, we have on the Marvel side, we have an X-Men podcast that I don't do. I bailed on the X-Men. I had an X-Men podcast at one point, and I was done.
There's too many books, aren't there? There's too many X-Men
were.
Books. You can't keep up.
The thing is, and it kind of goes with what I say about both The Simpsons and Star Wars. Once you start not liking as much as you like, are you really a fan anymore? And I am a fan of those, but I was doing the X-Men podcast, and suddenly I'm like, there's like 8 books, and I only like 2. I don't know about this. And then my guys, Jason and Ruben, they really like all the things, so I said, you can do it. At one point, I was going to do it with them, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm stepping away from there. But all the other things are done with me and a bunch of people. Then it's anybody who wants a podcast, you just let me know, and we'll end up doing it, is really the whole mantra of it. So there's a lot of things, but yeah, I have some help.
Okay, yeah. No, it sounds like you need it, but fair play. Is this just your hobby, Jim, or are you doing this as like a full-time thing, a full-time job?
No, it's just my hobby. It's just what I do. It's just that I end up just doing a lot. I don't sleep a lot, so I have to do something, and that's kind of the deal. It also goes with I have crazy things going on in my head. I have a severe attention deficit disorder, but that makes me hyper focus on one thing. And it's been comics for years. But before that, it was video games. Before that, it was movies. And I usually go through phases, but this one is kind of the one that's stuck.
Oh wow! I was going to ask you that. Yeah, that's the first official question. I prepared 200 multiple choice questions now.
B.
Maybe.
Always answer B.
Always go for B.
Yes,
really? I thought it was C.
I say. I say it's B. That's why I failed everything in college.
That's why I've been going wrong.
Yes.
Okay, the first question it's a simple one, Jim. When did you first get into comics?
It's fun. It was 2012, so it's not that long ago. It was the New 52 with DC, and I had heard about it a little, but I wasn't in the comics. And me and you are older gentlemen, and back in the day, comics were not cool or anything, and it wasn't something that everybody was doing or talking about. None of my friends, I played a lot of sports, so none of my friends that I know of, actually, that's a lie. One of my friends did read, I didn't know. He told me after the fact, like after I started doing the comic things, he's like, oh my God, I've been reading comics all this time and I didn't know you liked them. I said, I just started. But I was into sports as a kid. So then when I ended up when the New 52, and this is why a lot of people bash the New 52, and I kind of, I take it personally a bit because that was the way I got into comics, but it was more that I had switched jobs and started working with Eric, who I do the DC stuff with. I started working with him, and it's funny because he started talking about how much he loved comics. He read comics all his life, he's telling me, but at that point at the New 52, he had bailed. He didn't like the idea. He's a continuity guy, and once the New 52 came out and they wiped away all the continuity, he said, screw that, and he stopped reading. So he started talking to me about just older comics. Like, we worked 12-hour days, and we had, a lot of not downtime, but, time where we're doing our job, but we could talk. And I just listened to him all day, just going on. And I wasn't listening to everything. I droned out some of it. But he ended up where he's talking so much, and I'm like, well, this New 52, I'm going to look into this. So I started reading some of it. And then I said, you should read it. And he's like, I'm not reading that crap. New 52, screw that. Eventually, I started telling him about the comics then while we were working. And he's like, man, that seems pretty cool. And he started picking up some books. And then it was just both of us, picking up things and talking about it. But it's always good. If it wasn't for him, without having somebody to talk about them to, I wouldn't have never done it. Because it's not fun a lot of times just reading yourself. It's fun to talk about things. And that's why then eventually website, podcast, it all went from there.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's cool to know that. I didn't know. As for me, like, I got into it when I was young, when I was a kid, and it was through my older brother to begin with. And then buying comics. I think my first comic, Jim, I was checking was an issue of Gru the Wanderer by Sergio Aragones. Yeah. When was it? It was, I've got the issue pulled up here. It's issue 17, which was July 1986, I think. So that's going back. So I was into it as a kid. I wasn't into sports. I was the geeky guy at school, the one that everybody picked on. Oh, you like comics, you suck.
Exactly. That's what would happen. Now, I was a real little kid. And so for me, sports were the thing I got into because I ended up being pretty decent, but I would do that because I was so sick of people making fun of me, like, oh, look at you little guy, whatever. So I would play sports to try to, like, hey, look at me, and do that. So I did. But even then, I did read a lot of, like, I read the Sunday comic strips. And when you say Gru, it's funny because as things went on, I did get into Bone a little, just a little, and then around 2000, I did get into anime and manga for I'd say about 6 months. But when I get into something, everything goes crazy. I mean, I ended up at that point because I was getting fan subbed or fan dubbed and subbed video
Wow.
cassettes off of the internet of anime that wasn't available in the U.S. I was getting and I went nuts. And then eventually I'm like, well, I don't know. I wasn't that into it, but I liked stuff like Record of the Lotus War, and I think it was not Bastard. Oh, Slayers was another thing that I really liked then. And then I kind of got away from that and got into other things. But yeah, I've had dribs and drabs where I will read and grab stuff, but when I really got into it was that New 52.
Okay, cool. Well, I was into it for quite a while. I was into it when Vertigo came out, and then I'm not even sure why I dropped it. Maybe around the late 90s. I think. Oh yeah, I went to Australia for a year, so I dropped comics, and then never got back into it, Jim, until, believe it or not New 52. It was Rebirth for me.
Rebirth, yeah.
Yeah, at that point I was here. I was living in Japan. I've been here since 2002, so you can't get comics easily in Japan unless you live in Tokyo or maybe Osaka, a big city. So I hadn't thought about digital. And then someone said, like, if you tried Comixology, back when it used to be good. And that's how I got back into it, through digital comics with Rebirth and Tom King's glorious run of Batman.
Here's the thing. I ended up loving it at first.
And I did at first.
And then it kind of lost its way, but it was something that, first off, it got a lot of people, I think, into comics, but then it got some of those out of comics, and it was crazy. It's funny because when I started reading stuff, I've never been physical. I've always been digital, and so when people complain about digital, I need the feel of this. My eyesight isn't the greatest, first off, and I read almost everything at night. And when I'm reading at night, my wife is asleep. I don't have a light on. So it really became the idea of reading it on the computer than a tablet, because it's so convenient at night. Because I'm telling you, 99.9% of me reading comics is after 10 o'clock at night. I do all my stuff, and then I read what I'm going to do the next day. I read what I do for fun. But that's the thing. I mean, with you, do you read a lot of stuff now for fun, or is it because with me, it's almost all the things I read is for a show. It ends up and and it almost gets to the point where you kind of at points you know what? It'd be nice to just sit down and read 10 comics that I have no idea of doing a show or talk, because you do read them different. When you're reading a book for a review, you're there and you're nitpicking this, and then you're thinking, I mean, all the time I'm thinking of, okay, I'll talk about that, and that'll be a good joke there, and you're not really enjoying the comic as much. That's the shame of doing a lot of stuff like, videos and podcasts with comics, but it's still fun. It still allows you to have fun with the stuff.
I do read for fun, but as you say, since I started doing the YouTube channel, that's only been going a year and a half. Then I got more into, like, I don't know, even sometimes, Jim, I feel like I don't know how to read critically. I just enjoy things. I'll pick things out, but I do try and read for fun, but I don't read anywhere near the amount you do to cover on your podcasts. Again, I don't know how you do it. I'll maybe do 5 or 6 a week just to read, and I'll review 2 or 3. That's all. Yeah,
that's at one point why the DC podcast was so long. We do probably on the podcast now 80% of the books that come out. We don't do a lot of the Black Label or some things out of continuity at points, but we used to have that our thing was every book that came out. DC used to put out a lot of books. In the middle of the New 52, there were a lot of books. I mean, we had shows where we were doing 20 books. And the problem is that we don't have any sort of crazy time limit. So we made that a rule. You can't say, like, okay, we're going to do this 5 minutes. It would go, and sometimes the reviews for a book are an hour long. And it would just go on and on. There was legitimately the one time that we had that real long podcast. And these are podcasts that we would hit record and go straight through. And we started recording while it was still sunny out. And then when we finished, the sun had already come up again, and it was so depressing. We're like, what do we do? And then I had to go edit it, which is crazy. But at that point, I was a little lax on editing. I couldn't go through it, nitpicking things. But yeah, crazy. I read a lot of comics, and then because of the shutdown, even I got into manga, so that even made it even more, which I do love right now. That
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, was manga, is manga a recent thing, or have you been into manga for a while?
I did read a couple things like way back. Like I said, I got a couple trades, and it was wacky for me to go, right to left at first, which it is for everybody. It really is a different deal. And you start going, and the fun play is when you're doing all the stuff and you go and you read 2 manga, and then you go right to a Western comic, and you got to get your head straight of, okay, I'm going this way and stuff. But sometimes I'll read some Western comics. I'm like, I don't know. They read better right to left. I think these writers are terrible. But so it was the shutdown when they had, and I think a lot of people did that. They were already kind of getting tired of Western comics a bit, and the big 2 more. And so, and really, I'll say it was more the big 2, because a lot of people at that point, even to me, were saying, okay, you should read indie stuff. You should read all this indie stuff. And what I found was I would go and say that I was reading not necessarily like maybe an Al Ewing, and I'm like, well, I've had enough of that. I would go to the indie stuff, and the indie stuff was just done by the same people that were doing the big 2. That was their side book. So, and I love them. Yeah, and I love like a Jeff Lemire, and I love his indie stuff, but I wanted something. So I was like, I think my indie stuff is going to be manga. And people at that point, I mean, this is right at like 2019. We're getting shutdowns coming, all that. Yeah. And at that point, it seemed that was when a lot of comic fans were they were like setting out the battle lines. Like, listen, because if you liked manga, you were cheating on the Western comics. And all the thing that you heard was, manga's going to take over. Manga's going to take over. So people were like, no, that's not. It's terrible. I don't like that. So you would have a lot of people. I remember like getting into manga and reading some stuff. I got the Shonen Jump app, started reading some stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. And I tweeted out, listen, hey, I just started reading some manga. It's really, really good. I didn't know that it was this great. And I got attacked. People
I bet you did.
Take your manga and shove it up here. And I'm like, whoa, what the? It's just me saying I like it. But because I liked it at that point, I'm sure it was even worse a little bit before that. The idea of if you liked manga, that meant that you hated. I'm like,
you can't like both. Why is that? You can't like both? Like, come on. I just want a story, a good story.
And so now you do see where people, a lot of times they do bring up manga as a way to say that I'm done with the Western, I'm done with DC. I read manga, but I read it all. And in fact, I started getting into manga around a little bit after the time that I really started getting into Marvel, because I had always just been DC. So I got into both, and it's exciting to get into the new stuff and see how it is. Especially manga's so different, and then when you're reading it, and eventually when you're so used to it, whatever, you're like, well, it's not that different. It's just sometimes it seems to be better. It's a little more focused, and it has so much variety of it, which is what I love.
I think one of the main differences is these days, especially these days when you talk about Marvel and DC, is with manga, they tend to keep the same creative team, don't they? Yep. On a long run. It depends if it's successful. If it's successful, it keeps going. If it's not, it gets stopped.
That's what I love about it, is the idea that if you have a book in manga and it's not good, it's gone quick. I mean, it's gone real quick. They do not let anything hang around for too long. I mean, what they do, it seems, is wait for a couple volumes. If those volumes don't sell, you're done. You're out. It doesn't matter if it's the greatest thing ever. There's not anything like a hidden gem. A lot of times, if it doesn't hit, it's out. But most of it is pretty good. I mean, it's good because you have the same creators. You have, an easy starting point, and everything builds. You don't have a lot of changes. You don't have some new guy. In the big 2 especially, you end up where you get into something like a Spider-Man, and then the next thing you know, somebody else pops in, and they're like, I'm going to do my thing. And you're like, really? Like, this kind of stinks. Like the current Spider-Man. That's why I brought it up. Me and you are not enjoying it. No. I sit there and I read the issue, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my review. Then I look at your reviews. I'm like, oh my God, it's not going to be good.
It's very divisive, the latest run, isn't it? And I used it as a chance to kind of jump back on Spidey, because he was my first. After Gru, it was Spider-Man, and then it became Batman. But Spider-Man, when is it Michelini?
Yeah, Michelini, I think. Yeah, I always mess up, yeah.
Yeah. when he was writing back in the day, just after, when Todd McFarlane was drawing, before he was writing his own series. That was so cool, and I enjoyed that run. So I thought, I've not had Spidey for years. Let's get back on. Zeb Wills was pretty good on his Hellions run. Have you read that?
Yeah, that was really good. It was fun.
That was good.
That was one of the better X-Men books when I was reading the X-Men. It was fun, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened. And it's funny you said about Spider-Man being one of your first heroes that you liked. I ended up doing the Marvel stuff and then having a podcast because I wanted to get into Spider-Man. It was funny. I wanted to get into Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four. I'm trying to think of the Avengers and the X-Men. And of those four, I really don't love any of them. I ended up liking other things because the Jason Aaron Avengers I got so bored with early. Fantastic Four, they didn't even have a book at the point because I got involved when it was the fresh start, when you ended up having a bunch of new number ones. Then eventually Dan Slott got on the Fantastic Four, which was hit or miss, and I don't like this Ryan North stuff. So all these X-Men, I tried my hardest, but the Hickman stuff and the Hawks and Pox, I did enjoy enough, but I was confused because I wasn't a long-time reader. It seemed like it was more for that. Problem. So I was like, there's so many books. I tried to get into them, and there wasn't a real great way for me to be like, okay, this is my thing or whatnot. And then, with all of those things, they didn't really have the books hitting that I want, but I got into Daredevil with Chip Zdarsky. Really like that.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and little things like the Donny Cates Cosmic Ghost Rider I really like, and I'm hoping Stephanie Phillips doesn't ruin it currently, but things like that I really got into then. And now, like, Daredevil's one of my favorite characters now because I got in. And it's funny, my first character that I bought the books for in the New 52 was Aquaman because of Jeff Johns. And it was funny because growing up with the cartoons, the Super Friends, I never thought Aquaman was a joke. So I ended up, I thought he was cool. I mean, I don't know why, but I thought he was
never got into him. Yeah, I never got into him, Jim.
I thought breathing underwater was just the coolest thing anyway. And I don't know, do you remember there was a cartoon way back, and it was a Japanese cartoon. They called it Marine Boy here in the States, and it was a kid who would eat this like gum that was like a Trident gum, and he could breathe underwater. And I loved that as a kid. It was something in Philadelphia area they grabbed. I find out now that what they were doing was grabbing just these Japanese shows that were poorly dubbed but were real cheap, and they'd throw it on, and I love that. I love the
real cheap.
And I watched Star Blazers as a kid and things
cool.
like that, but no, I always wanted to breathe underwater, so I thought Aquaman was cool. So when I read the Jeff Johns Aquaman, I was like, man, this is really good. And a lot of people
good?
did.
I haven't read that.
It was awesome. You should at least the first two trades, and then it doesn't go for too long anyway, but I definitely would suggest reading it. So I read it, and I got online, and I'm trying to find, some, and they're like, man, finally, Aquaman's cool. I'm like, well, I didn't know he wasn't that, like, he was a joke, and I didn't know it. So, but it was great, that, and then I started reading Nightwing, and that was the Kyle Higgins Nightwing, which, again, when you're reading your first comic, it's one of those things where a lot of times it does amaze you. You're like, oh my God, it doesn't even matter if it's really good or bad. I read this thing one point because I was into sci-fi at one point, reading novels and stuff. And I read something that a guy had said that it's hard with science fiction, right? Because anything that you're going to start with is going to blow your mind. It's going to, you could read the crappiest pulp thing from, 1940. It will blow your mind because of the concepts. You have to keep reading to realize, ooh, that wasn't as good. But it's fun at the beginning. You get so excited about things, and you're all into it. It's like, oh my God, I didn't think this was going to be so great. And yeah, that was kind of me, and going through the whole New 52, just reading everything. But there are some things that everybody should probably read if you're a DC fan, if you haven't. Aquaman's one of them. It was really, really good.
The one that most people talk about with New 52 is the Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo Batman run, wasn't it? Which is very famous. I've got the first couple of trades, I think, of that. I didn't buy it at the time, as I say. I wasn't buying it when it was coming out. But did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
Have you been a Batman fan for a while?
I have. It's funny, like, when I end up saying my favorite character is Dick Grayson. And I
Okay.
always say that because I like Dick Grayson Robin, I like Dick Grayson Nightwing, I like everything Dick Grayson. So that was all. So when I ended up reading Batman, I always said that Batman's like the given. Like, you can't really hate Batman if you like DC Comics. So when I talk about my favorite characters, people say, like, well, where's Batman? I'm like, him, Superman, Wonder Woman, the Trinity, that's a given. But I did really like Scott Snyder's Batman. And then by the end, a lot of the things by the end of the New 52, going into that DCYOU right before Rebirth, things started going a little too long. They got wacky. At that point was the 50 millionth time.
Always gets wacky in the end, Jim.
Yeah, it does. The 50 millionth time that Batman had died. You had Superman without powers. You had all these things going on. And I love when people tell me, well, you know, that DCYOU stuff was really great. I'm like, why'd we get Rebirth then? You got Rebirth because it wasn't that great. People were like, I've had enough of this. But Rebirth really was the greatest.
I didn't even know the YOU thing.
Yeah,
that's the first time I've heard it. You talking about it now? Seriously, I'm not.
It's funny.
No way.
People will just say that it was the New 52 extended, but it's when Dan DiDio came out and said story over continuity. That was the big mantra, story over continuity, which drove my man Eric nuts. He's like, there's no way. And so he was getting all mad at that. But you had like a lot of mini-series. Like you had a Bizarro mini-series that him and Jimmy Olsen were on a road trip. It was okay, but not anybody. People don't remember it, but some things like the Grayson book by Tom King, which got him the Batman, that was part of it, and I loved that. And that was when I was full out Tom King fan. I thought it was the greatest.
When Tom King was good, eh?
Yeah, well, I think Tom King needs somebody to wrangle him in, but he also might need sometimes a co-writer because Tim Seeley was co-writing it with him, and I've seen interviews with both of them, and Tim Seeley says, listen, Tom had some wacky ideas. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. So maybe he needs that sounding board. And I'm sure that the wacky ideas with Tom King where this person would die, that person would be miserable, that person would die. That's what he does. But people love him, though. He's got a unique style. Not my favorite. And, you know, Heroes in Crisis, that was the worst. That, to me, was the nail in the coffin of the Rebirth where people were upset. So, but overall,
I enjoyed his earlier stuff, Jim. I enjoyed his Vision miniseries from
Marvel.
People love that. Was great. And I didn't even know the character, really. So that was good. Sheriff of Babylon, enjoyed that.
That was really good.
Quite dark, but good. And then, as you said, Batman started well, but I just think he maybe he lost it, or maybe, as you say, he wasn't reined in. Maybe it went to his head. I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird because, well, first off, you nailed the deal with Vision. He's better with characters that you don't know, because then you kind of get his version. I have a guy who's a good friend of mine online who's a Supergirl fan. And he would always say to me, because I'd sit there, you know, he's like, I really like Tom King. And then he did Supergirl, and he actually said a light bulb went off. You like Tom King until he does a character that you love, because then things
really
go. And he sat there and he's like, that's not Supergirl, because he knows Supergirl, but he doesn't know the Omega Men. So when Tom King does the Omega Men, you're like, this is really cool. This is awesome. And I think that's kind of the play where a lot of his fans kind of came aboard with him and I'll check this out because everybody's talking, and they go through the deal, and so the characters they learn, which sometimes is a shame. He teaches you what Mr. Terrific's about. Mr. Terrific to me isn't somebody who is hoping or saying, I'm glad that my wife and kid died. That's what happened in the Strange Adventures book, and our guy Wes went nuts with that. So
I dropped it. I dropped it about issue 5.
I always give his stuff a chance, but most of the stuff it's not for me. But that's why, comics. And again, I sit here and say, listen, everybody should have their favorite comic. Don't get upset about it. But then I go on the podcast and scream and yell about it. But I scream and yell about it because we're there to review it. But any other way, like you said, I would have dropped it. Yeah, it's
What was it? The Supergirl one, the Woman of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
I kept hearing from people I was watching, listening to, this is amazing, this is great. So I picked up just one issue, a random issue, and I was like, I don't know the character very well, Jim, but I felt this doesn't feel like Supergirl to me. This is like a pulp kind of, John Carter of Mars kind of pulp story, and it's very dark for Supergirl. It didn't feel like there was any hope in there. So
no, there was none, and that's what my buddy said. And I've gone on and I've said the idea with Tom King is he may, like the Supergirl book may be a good book, but it's not a good Supergirl book. It's you know, and you can a lot of times with him you could say, well, take Supergirl out and put, you know, Coriander in there, Starfire, and you'd have the same book. It still wouldn't be Starfire, but you can interchange, because I think he has ideas for stories, then he inserts the characters. And a lot of times it's funny with Tom King is they actually assign books to him. He doesn't say, I have a pitch for a Supergirl book. They say, hey, can you write a Supergirl? And really the thing was, they said, can you write a Supergirl book where she's a little darker and kicks more ass? And he's like, yeah, I could do that. And they went to a guy who, get darker and stuff, and that's a good guy to go to. But now James Gunn read that, and I'm like, oh, no, here we go. Because it didn't sell when it came out, but then it went through the roof.
Not really.
But I think that you might be, first off, it's true grit anyway. The whole series is pretty much a retelling. But if you're going to end up doing a movie and James Gunn's looking at things, I can see why you would kind of go with that, because it almost feels like a side movie type thing already. It's not like full out continuity, Supergirl this and everything. It's kind of a cut and dry story that doesn't really fit, but I think it does fit, even though I'll probably watch it, but I don't know. I'm not looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to all the stuff, though, but yeah.
Are you reading any current Tom King works? I'm not even sure what he's doing. I think he's doing is there a Gotham City or Gotham
now
something?
That just ended. I did not read that. He's doing Danger Street is the thing he's doing again. It's these side characters based on a deal where DC used to have a series that it was all number ones. You'd have a series up like, here's this character, then the next character number one, and he's doing that. But again, it's these side characters. I read one issue. It's not for me. But coming up, things are going to have to be for me and everybody else, because he's got the Brave and the Bold anthology. He's doing a Joker Batman story, which I don't know why we need another one of those. But he's also doing the Penguin solo series, and then he's doing Wonder Woman in the fall. He's going to be full out. And that's the thing. Even fans of Tom King should be able to admit that you don't really want him in continuity, but hopefully that means he'll relax a little and not kill everybody or make everybody a murderer or a genocidal maniac. It's just this thing, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
A depressed man with mother issues, something like that.
Always. And at the end, you're just like, Tom, you need to get some help. You need to go talk to somebody.
Seriously.
It's like, I understand that you might be doing your therapy through your comics here, but I don't want to be involved. I'm not there. Like, if you went to your therapist, I don't want to be there sneaking out of the closet listening in, please. But, he's interesting. And I think that the weird play is I don't think he means to do crazy stuff like he does. That's just what he does. And you said about Vision, I think that at points that Mr. Miracle, because Mr. Miracle was just his vision at DC. And Dan DiDio said that, give me your vision at DC. The thing that people don't remember, and they give Tom King a lot of credit for, I don't know why this became the Tom King show, but the thing
Tom King show?
Yeah, it is. So you end up where he gets a lot of credit for the things that go well, but every time something goes wrong, you always hear, well, he was made to do that. He did that. But that's how all the books are. So some things for people hit, some miss, but the Mr. Miracle deal, Dan DiDio told him even the character. So he said, do Vision, do Mr. Miracle. And then he did it. But I read that even, and I'm like, Mr. Miracle's trying to commit suicide in the first page? I'm like, no. Yeah. And if you look at my reviews, people went nuts on the site because I didn't like it. I kept saying, I don't know what's going on. He's being ambiguous. And I even said it like issue 4, what I thought it was going to end at. And I sit there and I read that review sometimes. I'm like, yeah, you could tell where it was going right away. But people did love that. People liked it. And it's just that I think he got stuck in this rut of, okay, I ended up Vision, everybody loved. Mr. Miracle, everybody but me and you, Gray. Everybody loved it. So then he started doing like Batman, and all of a sudden people were turning on him, and he seems to keep going back to the, okay, I'm going to go back to that formula with Mr. Miracle and Vision because that's what people loved. And I think he is somebody, even like you said with the therapy stuff, but even online, I think he craves praise from. I don't think he talks about his mom was real nice, but his dad kind of wasn't around or something, he said. And I think that he does crave this praise, and so he likes to go back to the thing that people will praise him. I do think that he takes, people not liking his stuff really, really personally, and so I think that he does do that. But a lot of people are like that. I think Scott Snyder's a lot like that, too. I've talked to Scott Snyder, and a lot of people have. He talks to a lot of people, a nicest guy, but you can tell he's always craving everybody to say, almost like he needs validation. And at one point, I even said to him, you're one of the biggest comic writers. You don't need me to tell you that you're good. Because he's like, oh, man. Like, he got upset. I think we had a review on our site. It was like an 8. And he really thought it should have been better. He wasn't saying, like, you got to rewrite. But he was
a great score, isn't it? People don't realize.
Yeah, and so he was talking to me, and it makes it seem like he was being a jerk, but he actually was like, well, what didn't you like about it? And I wanted to, he was really into like, oh my God, I need this to be a 10.
He's looking for a perfection. He wants to be a perfectionist,
that's the deal. And I think that when it's not perfect, if you're a 9.9, that means to him, I didn't do my job. It was crazy.
Oh, no.
But a lot of people, I at one point I talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people have bailed on us. But because some people get mad that, we give something an 8, and then the next issue sucks, and it gets a 4. But that's what it gets. That's always been our thing.
At least you're honest, Jim, and this is what we need. We've talked about this, haven't we? In messages on, for example, on Comic Book Roundup. It's a ridiculous site. It's full of. Not full. I'd say half the reviews I think are just paid for as shills. Like 9 and 10 for almost everything. Doesn't make any sense. So when you see honest reviews like yours, like Batman News, they usually do pretty honest ones. It's good to find them. And what do you think of that site at the moment? Do you think, is that site, does it have legs? Is it going to keep going, or is it dying? I feel like it's dying.
The part is, and it would kill me. And I talked to the guy who runs it occasionally, because what I said at one point way back, years ago, I said, listen, is there any way, because you can look at aggregate scores. You can actually, and what I always do, and I read tons of reviews. So when I'm reading the reviews, I also check out the reviewer, because you can click on them and see their average score. You see how many comics they have reviewed, all that stuff. And so when you go lately, it's like, okay, this guy gave it a 10 out of 10. Let's see what he's done. And you see the history and his aggregate score. Average score for some people, 9.6. I'm like, a 9.6 is like your average? And then you look and you can see, and I like the way that it goes, it's like color graded, that anything under a 7.5 is a yellow. Then you get like under a 6, I believe, or a 5, it's a red. And you could go through quick, and I'm like, there is nothing yellow. There's nothing like, there's a 6.9, there's still a yellow on that. So when you go down individual guys and go, you're like, these people don't go under a 9. They don't go under a 8, and it's crazy. So I said to the guy, too, because of sites, is there any way that you can make it so you have an aggregate score for a website? And so you could click on Weird Science and see that our average score is a 6.8. And then you click on something like a Newsarama or an Aped and realize, oh, my God, they think an average comic is an 8.8. Like, you would get to see these things of what's going down and whatnot. And if you want to click on something this week, you can click on the Joker, the Man Who Stopped Laughing, and you'll end up seeing a lot of things of how the sites go and whatnot. Because as you scroll down, 7. Oh, wait a minute, a 3.5. Who's that?
Who's that?
And again, that's not me trying to be controversial. I think that book stinks, so that's what I give it. So I ended up doing that, and but I said if you can get these aggregate scores for a site, then people would realize, okay, this site seems to be a shill. They're always a 9. I mean, an average of all their reviewers just happens to. And the guy said he could do it, but he was afraid that if he did that, it would turn off some of the people to websites and stuff like that. And he wants to keep things rolling, but I think that it would have been, one of those things. Also, when you end up seeing reviews and stuff like that, to me, you can look and see the length of the reviews and how well they're written and things like that. And I take my time reviewing things. And
That's
I'm
it.
not
I'm just
saying I'm the
scrolling down
greatest.
yours now. Look at this.
I end up,
That's
you
a
know,
lot of writing.
Then I end up explaining everything. And that's the thing, too, is when you love something, or at least you give it a 10 out of 10 and you call people on it, hey, why do you give it a 10 out of 10? What they say to me is, well, I liked it. Well, what did you like about it? And then they start getting defensive and say, whoa, sorry that I liked something. Oh, my. But they never have a reason. And then but if you don't like something, you're demanded to give a reason. And I always give a reason. I give a million reasons. If that comic got a 3.5, I have to, in my mind, I have to tell you why I don't like it. Why did I give it a 3.5? Because if I don't, I'm just a hater. And why would you pay attention to that? And I think that a lot of times, it's funny, because we started doing reviews in 2013. And when we did decide to do the site, I had already been reading comics then for a year and a half. Eric had been reading them longer than that. So it wasn't like we jumped in. The first comic we did, we're going to review it. So we already had, an idea of things and going. And we're from, back in the day, the 90s and so, and 80s. And you needed, at that point, people were a bit more cynical. Like in the 90s, especially, people, you weren't even allowed to like things, but
no,
we went with the deal that a reviewer is you have to look at it critically. This isn't a fan site. We're not, so when you write in, people at first were real mean to us. They were like, oh my God, you guys are so mean. But again, it was like a 6 or a 5. But back in the day, I used to get,
that's being honest. It's honest reviews, and people don't seem to like that because I think they get used to seeing these overinflated scores these days. And so when as you say, when you see a 4 or a 5, which is kind of average, it's not saying it's terrible, it's like 4 or 5 or 6. They're like, oh my God, what are you doing? And you hate everything.
Yeah, and the funny thing is for so long I get looked at. People have come out. When creators get mad at us, a lot of times they'll have these tweets and stuff. And the latest one was Gabe got Stephanie Phillips pissed off. And she came out and started yelling. And it's great. It's one of those things when you sit there and they say it, when things are going that way and you see, that's when you figure out who really does like you or who your friends are. Because these people who would talk, they came out of the woodwork to say that we were bull crap, we were this, and I'm insane. So I actually have a doc form where I have these tweets, the tweets on there, and the people who did it just in case later, I end up like, oh, you like us, do you? Well, you said this. I'm insane with that, but I got really mad about things. But again, it's because we were honest, and we always said that's our main thing. We don't fake the funk, and we're honest with the things.
Gabe's site as well. So Weird Science Marvel Comics you talk about. This is it,
Yeah, we have that. And he has his own site, Comical Opinions, too, that people can check out. That's pretty cool as well. But yeah, he does all of the Marvel stuff. I haven't done a Marvel thing in a while, but we have all that.
Okay.
And it's crazy because the people, you're putting your deal out. You're doing a comic. Of course, you're going to get upset if it has a bad score, but people have to be honest with it. And you have to use, if it's a 10-point scale, why aren't you using the 10-point scale? I've given some 1s. I've also given some 10s. So
me too.
But yeah, and the thing is, I hope that when people see me or you give 10s, they realize then, okay, this must be really good.
Yeah, this has to be good.
And even then, I don't say ever, you have to like this because I like it. People, but me and you, this week, clobbering time. I hated it, and you liked it, but that's because
I thought it was fun.
You thought it was fun, and it's weird because I wanted it to be fun, and it just wasn't clicking with me. But I'm not sitting there and saying that that Gray, he's a bunch of bull crap. No, that's what you like, and it's cool that everybody likes things. And people always get, when I see and I do a review, and people are like, I really liked it or I really hated it. I do always say, well, that's awesome, that's cool. I say in the videos all the time, if I don't like something, hey, somebody tell me why I should like it, because I really do. It'd be so much better to love everything. But you can't love. Everybody brings their own thing into it, and everybody has their own
it's
opinion.
Subjective, isn't it, Jim? For sure, subjective. You know, you like what you like, and not everyone's the same. God, that would be terrible if everyone liked the same thing, wouldn't it?
And that's what's weird when you say about people going to reviews. I think that they only if they love something, they only want to see somebody else to, tell them that back. Oh yeah, this is great. It's almost like true. Validation of, oh yeah, I get. But when they see something, oh, I don't really like it. The other day, I was talking to somebody about, and it was a Marvel book, and I wish I could remember what it was. See, but this guy gave it a 10, and I started talking to him. I said, I think it's like a 7.5, and he flipped his lid. He's like, what? That's ridiculous. You're negative. I'm like, that's not negative. I wish I could remember what it was because we were arguing about it. I wasn't even arguing. I just said, yeah, it's okay. And they got pissed off. I think it was something. It might have been Doctor Strange by Jed McKay, the new #1 a little bit. I was kind of bored.
Yeah, I found that a bit weird, Jim. Great art, but I couldn't get the voice, the character's voices. Yeah. It was very flat, I found.
That's what I thought as well. And it was like, okay, we're getting a reintroduction. Doctor Strange is back from the... But I'm like, it's okay, and I hope it gets better, but it's all set up. Yeah, it just felt like it wasn't really that exciting. When I read Doctor Strange, I want to see some crazy stuff and exciting stuff.
Me too.
And this guy just wouldn't take it. And again, then it became that he turned the Doctor Strange argument into that he likes Jed McKay's Moon Knight. And I'm like, all right, I wasn't talking about that. And that's okay. But again, sometimes you have these things where if it's not your character, you don't really care that much, or you have to have more. I always, when there's a book, especially new #1s, I go in to make me a fan of this character or book, get me going.
Me too.
And so sometimes it kind of gets in the way, because even like the newer Doom Patrol, either people like really love it or they're like, eh. And I was like, but I'm interested enough to go on. But
yeah.
There's always
like that. I was a little bit biased, I think, Jim, because I love the old. I told you I love the old Grant Morrison.
Yeah,
I know it's crazy. I know it kind of breaks your mind, but
it does.
I was into that when I was 17, 18. I was the right age for that kind of madness, if that makes sense. So this new one, I read it and I was like, yeah, I'm enjoying this, but I don't know. Afterwards, I was kind of rethinking my review. Like, maybe I was a bit generous with that. A little bit lower, maybe a 6.5, a 7 out of 10, which I think is a good score.
It's funny. I gave it a 6.5 on my video. I think I gave it a 5.5, but then rereading it and doing it for our Patreon podcast, I liked it more, and that happens a lot too.
You reread it.
Yeah, a lot of times you reread things and you like it, but if you're doing a lot of stuff, sometimes some people don't like rereading anything, but if you don't have the time to do it, but that's what's kind of cool, doing the videos first, then you kind of can redo it. Sometimes it goes down. The Tim Drake book, every time I read that new Tim Drake #7, it goes down and down. Eventually it's going to be in the negative. But again, I didn't like it for reasons that I explain. It's not just, I'm not reading that, I hate it, whatnot. So I don't know.
And I appreciate that about you. I notice you do that. You make an effort to do that. You're not just saying this is terrible because no reason. You list the reasons why. Okay, this didn't make sense. This over here, this didn't sound like Tim. He didn't act like a hero here. Blah blah blah. I did the same thing, Jim. On I don't know if you know League of Comic Geeks. I use that quite a lot. Drop reviews there, and somebody replied in a comment. It was a nice reply, but they countered every a negative point I gave, and basically giving excuses. Yeah, this was because of this, and no, they did set this up over here, and I was like, maybe, really?
Yeah.
Is it me? Is it me? Am I missing it or something?
And it's funny you say that. In the League of Comic Geeks, I do go and look at that because I love reading reviews. I'll read reviews all day. I always did. I loved from the very get-go of reading reviews. I don't go in saying, I'm not going to read bad reviews. I go, and if I have an opinion, I'm like, oh my God, that guy didn't like it. And I'll look and oh yeah, I get that, or I don't agree with that, whatnot, but that's their deal. But since I was a little kid, and my friends used to yell at me because when even like, oh, we're going to go see this movie. And I'm like, well, I saw, Siskel and Ebert, they said this. And I used to get papers to read the reviews and stuff like that. And so I love reviews. So when we started doing the comic reviews, I take it pretty seriously. Even if I try to have fun, I think that it's something you need to do seriously because you are giving people an opinion that they're going to go spend their money. They go and you want people to like your reviews, but you have to be honest. You can't just say everything's a 10 out of 10. And when you get that, like you said, and we'll go back to the Roundup, the problem is the Roundup site, it just grabs reviews. So the thing is, I don't know that it's the comic book Roundup that is the problem. It's that I think that a lot of website reviews don't have legs anymore. It's the website reviews that are now falling. And legitimately, because luckily, and one of the things that me and Eric were always, oh man, if we do these reviews, we'll get free comics. That was one of the things that we wanted. And we get we get review copies from almost all the companies. And then when you look at it and you say, what, you get reviews from DC, review copies? And the thing is, and I got the review copies a week. The guy got a hold of me, the guy who's still the publishing guy, the PR guy, he got a hold of me when I gave a 3.5 review for Batman and Robin Eternal, that nonsense that came out during the New 52. Wow. And I didn't like it. So I gave a 3.5, and I was F-bombs in this review. I was angry. I was all upset. And he got a hold of me, and he's like, hey, I read that review. I was like, oh, crap. But then again, the best thing is me and Eric doing the site where we were just on a Blogger. Who cares if they don't like us? It doesn't matter. We don't have sponsors. We're just doing this. So what is the big deal? So he got a hold of me. He's like, do you want the review copies? And I'm like, what? And he's like, I think that review was hilarious. I mean, I know what nobody else is cursing like that. No, I'm like, okay. And so we got the review copies. Then at one point they pulled them away from us, and they ended up saying, okay, you're not going to get them anymore. You're too negative, something like that. And I think for some reason, I think he was like testing us or something like that. And I said, okay, because he was kind of hinting like, if things were a little more positive. And I said, I don't know what you're saying, but we're not changing anything. Fine. I mean, the only difference is now I'll have to get them, which again, that's something. But he was going, well, you won't have to do them earlier. Earlier, I said I'd do them like an hour before they go up. That's not going to change it. So then it was like 6 months. We didn't have them. All of a sudden, then he gets a hold of me again and says, hey, do you want them back? I'm like, okay, we didn't change anything. We weren't more positive. And I think that the play is, if you are doing a site or a podcast, number one, if you are popular, they will give you the things. It doesn't matter if you're negative or positive. They will give you the stuff. And they just want, I think that we always thought we were like their deal, that they had cred then. Like, hey, we don't just give it to the 10 out of 10s. We also give it to the 6s and the 5 reviewers. So I thought that. But even then, people, it drives me nuts because people are right. A lot of these sites are afraid to lose the review copies, or they want them. And they also want to be praised. They want to. Half of them want to be comic book writers, but it's not going to happen. But we've also been in. I think when we've been actually physically in 8 comic books. Me and Eric as Weird Science. We have been we've been in Green Arrow. We've been in. I think it was the Trinity book back, and I was in Old Man Logan. In the Marvel deal.
What? As a character?
Yeah, as a character.
That's awesome.
The thing is, the funny play is, it was more Juan Ferreira, but also a guy, V. Ken Marion. They ended up but every time it was like a contest to see how we would die. Every issue we're in, we're either dead or really hurt and like one point I'm being pulled out of the rubble of this plane wreck. We were on a plane crash in Green Arrow. It's like all these things. Yeah, and then I believe it was in the Trinity book, we're getting grabbed by like parademons and taken off to Apocalypse. But it's always fun. And the funniest thing is that the people, they don't know what I look like, because it's one of the things when I first started doing stuff, especially the podcast and then the YouTube, I promised my wife that I wouldn't show she's worried that if somebody sees this, I'm worried that they'll see it and run away.
Oh, but you're that guy. You're that guy. They gave that Tom King comic too.
Or she's afraid that people would come and find us. She had these fears already, and then True Crime Podcast came out, and now it's you can't get near anything. She thinks everybody's doing this. I said it's the joke. I've seen even people talking about this, but she's listening to True Crime. She's writing notes down. I'm like, oh no. I said to people, if I die, look into it. If they say, oh, he died of a heart attack, look into it, because there might be something else with my wife with the stuff. But she said, so I've been debating on, because I think that doing the YouTube stuff, you do get more of a personal touch when, you know, somebody can see you and you can talk about things. So maybe eventually I'll convince her. But the thing is, when they drew us in these comics, they don't know what I look like. Like, they didn't even ask me, like, send me a picture, because for the most part, it was a surprise. Yeah. They did this. Sure. And just to say the deal, Juan Ferreira put us in a bunch of things, but he did that because in one of the Green Arrow issues, he drew, there was supposed to be the Venus de Milo. It's there, but the Venus de Milo looked like Rocky Balboa. And we laughed about it on the podcast. We weren't being mean. I'm just like, oh, it's the Venus de Rocky. And Juan Ferrer got a hold of me and said, you know what? You were talking, he was rushed. And at the end, he ended up getting to a point. He's like, that looks like Rocky, but I don't have time, and let it go. And he's like, you're the only people who called us out on it. And so he put us in a bunch of issues. But that's, again, there are some people.
He didn't get angry and react like these days.
And I love him. I think that he's a great artist and, you know, kind of a connection there. But even then, there's been a couple issues after that I'm like, I don't think he had enough time here. I'm not going to kiss his butt just because of all that. But, yeah, it's weird because some people really do like, if you give them legit criticism, they appreciate it because that makes them better. But others
That's how you learn.
Others look at it as, hey, and again, if anybody's listening and they have a website and they give up, I've been told by multiple creators that they do not pay attention to 10 out of 10 reviews because they say, like, they know that they like 10 out of 10, that's stuff like, and you could even argue Watchmen or, you know, Why the Last Man, all these things are like the things that people have listed, the all-time greats, you know, Frank Miller, Daredevil. Those are 10s, right? And but so when you say that the newest issue of Harley Quinn is a 10,
it's insane.
And maybe there will be one of those, but not this stuff. Like, there are some really great comics that I could tell you. There's so many good comics, but don't think that they're perfect. They're not perfect.